Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take these just overwhelming stacks of sources. We're talking articles, human rights reports, government analysis, and we try to distill it all down into clear, essential knowledge for you.
And today we are undertaking a particularly heavy one.
We really are. We're doing a deep dive into an event that analysts are calling, and this is not an exaggeration, potentially the most significant political eruption in Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Yeah, we're talking about the mass demonstrations that kicked off in late December 2025 and just exploded into January 2026.
It's a critical deep dive, but I have to say it's an incredibly sobering one, too.
Absolutely. The sheer volume of our source material here, it's just immense. It details the chronology of the causes and, well, the devastating human cost.
And the data we have confirms protests in a staggering number of places.
It's incredible. We're looking at reports from over 500 different sites, and that's spanning all 31 of Iran's provinces, every single one.
That geographic spread alone tells you this is something different. This surpasses the scope of even the monumental 2022 Mahsa Amini protests.
It really does. It signals something more fundamental, a truly national rejection of this system.
So our core question for you today is really twofold.
Yep.
First, how did a crisis that started as, a technical economic breakdown, a collapse of the currency, how did that escalate so violently and so quickly?
Into a widespread, multifaceted movement demanding the outright overthrow of the Islamic Republic.
Exactly. And then the second part is, in response to that, what desperate, brutal, and frankly systematic tactics did the government deploy to suppress this movement?
Especially under the cover of a communications blackout.
Right.
So we're going to meticulously track the timeline. We'll start from that initial spark that was ignited by market traders in the Grand Bazaar. Then we'll follow the national expansion, which was fueled by student and labor strikes. And we'll have to conclude with the tragic, verified mass casualty reports that emerged from under the cloak of that nationwide internet blackout the regime imposed.
We have to begin really with the environment that made this explosion almost inevitable.
That's a tinderbox.
Exactly. Yeah. This wasn't just, poor economic performance. This was a perfect storm of mismanagement, external pressure, and just chronic grinding hardship that created a true economic tinderbox in late 2025.
That's exactly the right word for it. By the final few months of 2025, Iran's economy was facing multiple compounding failures all at the same time.
And the inflation rates were already insane.
They were crippling. We saw a rate of 48.6% in October 2025. It dropped just a tiny bit to 42.2% by December, but that's still catastrophic.
For context, what does a rate like that actually do to an average family?
It just erodes everything. It wipes out savings. It destroys the purchasing power of anyone on a fixed salary. Every trip to the market becomes a source of panic.
And the immediate trigger, the flashpoint for the protests, was the currency collapse.
Yes.
When we look at the depreciation of the Iranian rial, the numbers are just. They're historic. They're unprecedented lows.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk us through those numbers? Because they're so crucial to understanding the panic that set in.
Sure. So the rial had been weakening for years. That's not new. But in late December, it didn't just weaken. It went into an absolute freefall.
To what level?
It hit 1.45 million to the US dollar.
1.45 million.
Yes. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a number on a trading screen. This level of volatility meant businesses literally could not price their goods.
It makes commerce impossible.
Completely. And for regular citizens, they were watching their life savings just evaporate overnight.
And the government couldn't stop it.
The central bank tried. They made attempts to stabilize the currency, but they failed almost immediately. And that failure was a huge signal. By January 6, 2026, the rial spiked even further. It hit 1.5 million to the dollar. That level of depreciation basically signaled that the government had utterly lost control of its own monetary policy. The confidence was just gone.
And the human fallout from this economic breakdown was immediate.
Yeah.
It was deeply personal. We're talking about essential goods, food, medicine, becoming completely unaffordable, right?
Precisely. The sources we have highlight these specific, massive price increases that affected every single Iranian household. Food prices, for instance, shot up by an astounding 72% year on year.
72%.
Yeah. And then you have health and medical goods. These are not luxuries, they're non-negotiable necessities. They increased by 50%.
So the crisis was literally starving and sickening the population?
It was. And on top of all that, you have failing infrastructure.
Right, so even if you had money, the basics weren't there.
Exactly. At the same time as the inflation crisis, Iran was grappling with these chronic energy deficits. We saw widespread electricity and gas disruption.
The planned blackouts.
The so-called planned blackouts or supply issues, these crippled both industry and home life. And remember, this is during the colder months.
And we can't forget the water crisis.
No, we cannot. It's a severe, ongoing, and completely mismanaged water crisis that left many regions of the country struggling for basic hydration and sanitation.
So when you add it all up, the economy fails, and the state cannot provide the most basic necessities like food, water, and power.
The social contract is completely broken. There's nothing left.
It seems like the primary driver here was internal, monetary and fiscal mismanagement. But the sources are really clear that external pressures piled on at the absolute worst possible time.
And that combination is what made it so explosive. Internally, yes, analysts blame chronic budget deficits, terrible governance. But externally, two major events happened that caused widespread panic and instability.
The first being the sanctions.
First, the United Nations reimposed its nuclear-related sanctions in September 2025. They did it through the snapback mechanism.
Okay, for you, our listener, who might not be familiar with that mechanism, what exactly does snapback mean? And why was it so impactful right at that moment in late 2025?
So the snapback provision is it's a feature of the original 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. It essentially allows any one of the original participants in the deal to unilaterally reimpose all the old UN sanctions if they claim Iran is in violation.
And there's no veto.
No veto.
Yeah,
Snaps back. And the effect was immediate and crippling. It froze Iranian assets that were held abroad, it halted arms transactions, and it added significant new layers of financial pressure on any international company still dealing with Iran.
So it sent a clear message to the global market.
A very clear message. Iran was once again a pariah state, and that just dried up foreign investment and, of course, further weakened the rial.
And all of that sanction pressure came right after a period of intense military anxiety.
Correct. The anxiety was palpable across the country following the 2025 12-day war with Israel, which happened earlier that year.
So you have the memory of that war.
On the renewed UN sanctions, and then you add in the general uncertainty around American foreign policy. It created this massive instability in the market. Iranians started to fear not just economic hardship, but a broader regional confrontation, maybe one involving the United States.
So economic uncertainty became conflated with a kind of existential dread.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Which brings us to this crucial pivot point. When you have this level of economic desperation, how does the protest movement move so swiftly from just demanding economic relief to demanding a total political overhaul?
Well, the economic hardship was the catalyst, but the deep-seated, long-standing political grievances, that was the overwhelming fuel. It really wasn't just about the real deal in the end. It was about 47 years of accumulated failures.
What were some of those core grievances the protesters were citing?
They were consistent across the country. Authoritarianism, rampant political corruption, documented human rights abuses, the intrusive mandatory job enforcement.
Still a major issue.
A huge issue. And also ethnic and religious persecution. The economic crisis basically just shone a massive, harsh spotlight on all these foundational issues that had been simmering for decades.
And we see all of this political anger just crystallized in one powerful, globally recognized slogan.
Yes, the chant that became iconic really worldwide. Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran.
And that phrase is so significant.
It's extremely significant because it directly links the domestic suffering of Iranians to the regime's foreign policy priorities.
It's a direct accusation.
It is. Protesters were explicitly accusing the government of wasting Iran's national wealth and resources money that was desperately needed for food, for medicine, for infrastructure at home on supporting its foreign proxies.
Naming them directly.
Naming Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. They were saying the regime cared more about them than its own citizens. It was a complete and total rejection of the regime's entire ideological mission.
I want to pause on the political disappointment here because the sources confirm there was just this deep loss of faith in any possibility of internal reform.
Yes.
President Masoud Pezeshkian, who was elected in 2024, he came in promising good governance, a reformist platform.
Yeah.
And he appears to have completely and utterly failed.
Pezeshkian was the reformist hope for what little hope was left. But his failure was total. He promised to lift internet censorship, which was a key demand after the 2022 protests.
He didn't deliver.
He failed to deliver. And what's worse, his administration oversaw the catastrophic cuts to water and electricity during this crisis. His failure provided absolute proof to many Iranians that the system itself was simply unreformable.
So even a moderate president was powerless.
Powerless against the entrenched hardline structure, he couldn't change a thing.
And we have a really powerful statement from the student body at Shahid Beheshti University that just captures this sentiment perfectly.
We do. They issued a declarative statement, and it's worth quoting directly. They said, "This criminal system has taken our future hostage for 47 years. It won't be changed with reform or with false promises."
That's not just criticism.
No. That's an obituary for the reformist movement. It pushes the entire movement towards one place, the definitive, immediate demand for regime change. There's no other option left on the table.
Okay, so let's analyze how this particular wave of dissent, the 2025-2026 protests, how it compared to the monumental 2022 Masa Amini movement. The sources note some really distinct differences in scope and demographics that point to a changing landscape of opposition.
The first and most obvious difference is that geographic scope, which we've mentioned. While the Amini protests were huge and very focused in key areas, this wave was just. It was far more geographically pervasive.
Over 500 locations.
Right. And crucially, it extended into small towns, into settlements, places that often escape the notice of international media. This demonstrates that the desperation wasn't just limited to the urban centers. It had reached every single corner of the country.
And the demographics of the protesters shifted slightly too, right?
Yeah.
Well, 2022 was so visibly dominated by the leadership of women and girls.
And it was an incredible and powerful thing to witness.
Absolutely. But 2025-2026 saw a slightly different mix on the streets.
Yes. The woman life freedom movement remained incredibly important as a foundational idea. But in 2025-2026, we saw young men playing a larger, more visible, and often more confrontational role in the street clashes.
And our sources point to Gen Z.
Yes, the sources describe Generation Z, whose political consciousness was really forged during the brutal 2022 crackdown, as one of the most visible and active groups.
What does that mean for the movement?
It means they are politically radicalized, they have no memory of the Pahlavi monarchy, they have no faith in reformism, their demands are immediate and absolute, they've only ever known this system, and they want it gone.
And the other key shift, which we're going to detail more in a bit, is the ideological overlay, this notable rise in monarchist sentiments. But right now, I want to zero in on a huge historical factor that made this uprising unique.
The bazaar.
The crucial role of the market traders, the bazaar.
The involvement of the bazaar is nothing short of a historical earthquake. I mean, to understand its significance, you have to remember that the bazaar, this collective body of traditional merchants and shopkeepers, was hugely influential in the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
They helped overthrow the Shah.
They helped mobilize resources, they helped to mobilize public support to overthrow the Shah. They were, in many ways, an early and essential pillar of support for the current regime.
So their participation now, fueled by the currency collapse, this is a massive structural defection.
It is. I mean, on a practical level, the extreme exchange rate volatility meant they just couldn't trade reliably. Their businesses were collapsing.
And they were being blamed for it.
Exactly. They were also angry over the government publicly blaming them as price gougers. So their strikes marked what Iran International definitively called a historic break between the merchants and the Islamic Republic.
What does that break imply?
It implies that the regime is not just fighting an ideological youth movement anymore. It is losing the support of traditional, powerful, and economically essential segments of its own society. And that loss of structural support is far, far more dangerous to them than any single protest.
The timeline of this escalation is it's breathtaking. It really demonstrates the lightning speed with which an economic strike transformed into a national political confrontation demanding fundamental regime change.
It happened so fast.
Let's start with that crucial first day in the commercial heart of Tehran.
The ignition point was December 28, 2025. The initial strikes were led by shopkeepers and merchants in Tehran's main commercial centers. The Aladdin Shopping Center, Shah Mall, and of course the historic Grand Bazaar.
And their original demands were very practical.
Highly focused, very practical. They wanted the government to stabilize the exchange rates. They wanted to prevent the immediate collapse of their businesses due to the volatility. It was about survival.
And those initial gatherings, on day one, they were described as purely economic and relatively peaceful. But that peace lasted less than 24 hours before the state decided to respond with force.
That's right. By December 29, the protests had already expanded. They were moving outside the commercial centers and into the streets, and law enforcement deployed very quickly. We saw the first use of tear gas outside the Aladdin shopping center.
And it was on this second day that the movement gained its first truly viral symbol of defiance.
It did.
Tell us about the figure who became known as Tehran's Tank Man.
This was a deeply powerful, almost cinematic moment. Viral footage just spread like wildfire, showing an unidentified protester sitting defiantly in the middle of Jamhuri Islami Street, directly blocking the path of a convoy of motorbike security forces.
Drawing that direct comparison to Tiananmen Square.
Exactly. He was immediately dubbed Tehran